Roster construction is one of the most important aspects of success in all of professional sports, but in the minds of most of the average fans and viewers, it tends to get glossed over. If you want to win at the highest level, you obviously need some of the best players on your team, but there are so many other factors that get taken into account behind the scenes. You need to form the best possible team within the salary cap rules, meaning you only have so much money to spend, and the way you spend that money can either make or break a team. The best teams manage their money tremendously, and the worst teams tend to be the ones overpaying players that aren't talented enough to justify the salary, which brings us to the topic of today's video. For both this video and my next video, I'll be running through every team in the NBA and identifying the most overpaid player under contract for next season on those teams, with this one going through the East and tomorrow's video going through the West. Before we get started though, it turns out about 73% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, because not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now, with that being said, let's begin. Going in alphabetical order, the first team up is the Atlanta Hawks, and their most overpaid player is Dwayne Dedmon. Dedmon is the team's second highest paid player going into next season, making over $13 million per year, but he's currently a backup center coming off of a season where he averaged just 6 points and 6 rebounds per game. He's really not a bad backup center by any means, but for that money, he was the easy choice here. Next up is the Boston Celtics, and their most overpaid player is Gordon Hayward. Hayward signed a max contract with the team back in 2017 that will pay him $34 million this season after being an all-star in Utah, but unfortunately, due to a variety of circumstances, mostly involving injuries, he just hasn't been able to perform as expected, making him one of the worst contracts in the whole league. He did actually have a pretty good season last year, putting up about 17 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists per game on pretty good shooting efficiency, but those aren't the kind of numbers you would expect from a player with a max contract. They're more so the level of production from a good maybe third or fourth option. Up next is the Brooklyn Nets, and their most overpaid player is Taurean Prince. Prince was actually a pretty good role player in his 3 seasons in Atlanta, so when Brooklyn acquired him, they immediately rewarded him with a 2-year extension, paying him about $14 million per season. And that would have been great if his production didn't completely fall off this year. One of the best parts of his game was he was a reliable 3-point shooter that made the shots efficiently on the wing, but this year his scoring average dropped to just 12 points per game, and he got those points by shooting a poor 38% from the field and 33% from 3. Next up is the Charlotte Hornets, and their most overpaid player is Nicholas Batum. Batum has infamously been landing on these kind of lists for a while now because of the monster contract he signed back in 2016 that will pay him $27 million this year. This was a baffling move for the team to make at the time, and it's continually proven to be bad ever since, as he's now coming off of a year where he put up a minuscule 4 points per game on dreadful efficiency while failing to impact the game positively anywhere else. Next up is the Chicago Bulls, and their most overpaid player is Otto Porter. Porter had emerged as a very reliable third option for some good Wizards teams a few years ago, and the hope was that he would continue to trend upward into earning his big $100 million contract, paying him $28 million next year, but his improvements halted, and after he got paid that money, he's now getting paid that much to put up 12 points and 3 rebounds per game with solid defense at times, which is not exactly the kind of production many hoped he would have at this point in his career. The next team up is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and their most overpaid player is Kevin Love. Kevin Love was kind of just the choice by default here because most of the roster is made up of young players on their rookie deals. When Love signed the max contract, currently paying him $31 million per year, the hope was that he had a few all-star caliber seasons left to help them stay relevant, but now the Cavs seem to be shifting more towards their rebuild, and Love's fat contract is hampering their ability to go all in on it until they find someone who wants to trade for him. Up next is the Detroit Pistons, and their most overpaid player is Blake Griffin. The Pistons took a risk trading for Griffin 2 seasons ago, hoping he could boost them to playoff relevance, but unfortunately for them, injuries have killed any chance of that happening, and this past year, Griffin looked like a shell of his former self in the limited time that he played. He's making $36 million next year, making him one of the highest paid players in the league, but the likelihood of him ever getting back to his former self and living up to that contract seems unlikely at this point. Next up is the Indiana Pacers, and their most overpaid player is Jeremy Lamb. Lamb is a nice option to have on the wing as a scorer, giving you 12 points on mediocre efficiency, but he's not much of a playmaker, he struggles on defense, and what he is for the price tag of over $10 million per year just seems to be a bit too much for a player of his caliber. Up next is the Miami Heat, and their most overpaid player is Kelly Olynyk. The Heat are a franchise that in recent years have done a tremendous job turning their team around after having a few seasons in a row marred by bad decisions, mediocre players, and middling promise for the future. Olynyk was one of the players given too much money during those years, as he really isn't worth the $12 million that he makes just to space the floor as a shooter. Luckily, they've managed to improve their money management since then, and now they have one of the brightest futures in the conference. Up next is the Milwaukee Bucks, and their most overpaid player is Ersan Ilyasova. He's the team's 6th highest paid player, making $7 million for this year, but at the end of the season, he wasn't even a part of their rotation. He only played in 3 of the team's playoff games, and in that time, he barely made any sort of significant impact, which just isn't good enough money management no matter how you try to spin it. Next up is the New York Knicks, and their most overpaid player is Julius Randle. The Knicks are another team filled mostly with young players on their rookie contracts, and many of the players that they also have outside of that are on team options for next year that likely won't get picked up by the team, meaning Randle basically has to be the choice here. He's making $19 million next season, and while his production of 19 points and 10 rebounds per game doesn't seem bad on paper, many Knicks fans have become incredibly frustrated with his lack of court awareness and poor shot selection throughout games. Up next is the Orlando Magic, and their most overpaid player is Farooq Aminu. After making the playoffs for the first time in a while last year, they brought Aminu in as their big signing for $10 million per year to get some good veteran experience, balanced production across the board, and impactful play in a role player's position, but he only managed to play 18 games for them before getting injured and missing the rest of the year. Up next is the Philadelphia 76ers, and their most overpaid player is Al Horford, who might very well be the most overpaid player in the entire NBA. Horford is making $28 million next year, and after having what was his worst season in a very long time, where he showed very clear signs of being past his prime on both ends of the floor, he's currently limiting a lot of what the Sixers want to do. Next up is the Toronto Raptors, and their most overpaid player is Patrick McCaw. The Raptors are a team that generally have been very good with their money, and the choices here were slim. McCaw really hasn't ever developed into a player worth being in the rotation, yet he's making $4 million next year, and for that, he was the choice kind of by default. And finally, the last team in the conference is the Washington Wizards, and their most overpaid player is John Wall. Wall was one of the best point guards in the league at his best, but ever since he signed a max extension paying him over $40 million from here on out, he's been killed by injuries, and there's just no telling if he'll be able to recover and regain his previous superstar form. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.